Welcome back, everyone, to the Sensitivity Doctor, and happy holidays, whatever holiday you may be celebrating. This is the 100th episode, and I'm so excited to share something you can put into practice right here, right now, at the end of the year when things are super intense. And of course, we have all of our kiddos home. So I had author Amanda Robinson, who is a licensed practicing counselor out of Austin, Texas, with me today. She's actually a fellow Penguin Random House author. That's how we got connected. And we talk about how to identify your highly sensitive children and how to take care of them. And the thing that I really loved was that we didn't just stop at HSCs, highly sensitive children. We also talked about the importance of empathy for parents and really taking care of the whole unit and the whole family during this high pressure time of the year, and unpack some of the great exercises she shares in her book, The Highly Sensitive Child's Workbook, 50 Fun Exercises to Help Kids Feel Less Overwhelmed, Communicate Their Needs, and Thrive. If you want to learn how to do this, check out the episode. And if you wouldn't mind also checking that subscribe button and also rating this episode, it really helps other people find these skills and these ideas and these awesome guests who come and share ideas of how to raise highly sensitive children and how to just live in the world as a highly sensitive person. So enjoy the episode, everyone. Well, for anyone listening, if we've started already, I have Amanda Robinson here, who is a fellow Zeitgeist Penguin published author. And I reached out to you because you wrote a book that I am personally interested in, having my own highly sensitive child. And we're also excited. This is the 100th episode of
Yay.
now the Sensitivity Doctor. We've shifted a couple times, and I'm so excited because the timing could not be more perfect, which you and I were chatting about, because a lot of parents are going to be home for the holidays. Whether or not you celebrate Christmas, there's usually a winter break. And that means lots of feelings under one roof, lots of people often under one roof. And we thought, what better time to help guide parents to know how to handle these big feelings and to talk to an expert in that area who just wrote a fabulous workbook all about doing this. So, welcome, Amanda. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
Awesome. So, could you start by, letting the listeners know a little bit about you and what led you to want to work with these children and write for and care for these children?
Absolutely. So I am a professional counselor and registered play therapist in Texas. So I've been working with children for about a decade now and pretty quickly found myself drawn to children that reminded me of the struggles I had in childhood, being emotionally sensitive and anxious about new situations. So when I started working with kiddos and started hearing about the highly sensitive child umbrella, I didn't really do a lot of questioning myself at the time about do I think I was a highly sensitive child? But I have had conversations with my parents since then, since my book came out. And it's been an interesting discussion because we are all in agreement that I was definitely emotionally sensitive, definitely had a hard time with change in routine. But on the other side of things, I didn't really show that sensitivity to environmental stimuli. So being bothered by lights and sounds and stuff like that a lot of children are. So I'm not sure that I was a highly sensitive child, but that being said, I absolutely think that I am a highly sensitive adult now. So we were chatting before things started. I had a newborn at home when I started this book, and I started as I am writing and researching, I'm thinking about the traits of highly sensitive children constantly. It's very fresh on my mind. And I found myself feeling like, you know what? I am really bothered if my baby's crying and the TV's on and maybe my husband's trying to say something to me. Too much happening at once sends me from regulated and calm and fine to ticked off at the drop of a hat. And I started to kind of put these puzzle pieces together of I think I might be a highly sensitive person. And having this realization about myself opened up even more compassion and love for the highly sensitive kids that I work with. They They are awesome people. They are empathetic, they are creative, they are passionate, and I want to help them thrive and show the world their many strengths and, experience empathy for their struggles and help with those things.
I mean, and to your point, how you were saying you weren't quite sure if you were a highly sensitive child, but that there is research out there showing that some traits of sensitivity can become more expressed as we get older and as environmental factors kind of, turn on those epigenetic markers. So there can be, I do remember similarly in certain ways not feeling quite as highly sensitive as a child, but more so as an adult when there's more stress.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's almost like just over time living your life, you get it's like that emotional cushion, so to speak, gets worn down a little bit more and more and more. So as an adult, stuff that maybe wasn't a big deal when you were a kid suddenly feels like a big deal.
Yeah. Oh, I love that emotional cushion. That's a good way to put that.
Yeah. I think that's sort of how it feels in working with these kiddos sometimes is sort of figuring out what builds up their buffer, what helps them feel more resilient, and what wears the cushion down.
Yeah. And one other thing too, when considering you had said you didn't exactly notice it as much with external stimulation, but it was a little bit more internal. And I do
Yes,
think that's important for us to remember that each person's sensitivity or neurodiversity is going to look different. And it's
absolutely.
not going,
Yes.
and if you even look at the HSP scale, I think Dr. Aaron mentions if there's fewer things that you say yes to, but they're very obvious,
Strong. Yes.
right? Very
Yes.
strong, you may still be highly sensitive. So
Absolutely.
keeping in mind her scales and things like that, how would you tell parents or help parents find out whether or not their child is highly sensitive?
It is so tricky because there's no objective test that we have yet to determine if somebody is truly highly sensitive or not. I think of it as sort of similar to how we provide diagnoses, though. When we're thumbing through the DSM and we're trying to figure out if a child, let's say, has an anxiety disorder or ADHD, they don't have to hit every single bullet point. The criteria will say something like meets 5 of the 7 criteria. And so that's kind of what I try to look at. I, have a bulleted list in my mind of what highly sensitive children tend to present. And are we hitting a good number of those bullet points? Or is it more like, okay, yeah, they don't really like the texture of certain foods and maybe changing routine is hard, but that's kind of it. Then maybe that's just, you know, normal, developmental, typical stuff, but we can help them kind of ease up on those challenges too. I think that the physical sensitivity is stimuli I feel like I see pretty often. It's just, as you said, presented differently. Some people are really bothered, as I mentioned before, like lots of different sounds from different places bug me and might bug a lot of kids. Others, it might be more about itchy clothes textures or lights being too bright or just a lot of busyness around. That's something a lot of them experience in the classroom. If everybody's splitting into groups and there's 50 different conversations happening and the teacher's yelling over everybody to be quiet, then those situations start to become really stressful for them. But there are other aspects here too. They tend to be pretty intensely impacted by other people's emotions. And that can be the emotions of the people right in front of them, but that can also be what they're seeing on TV. Some children, certain TV shows or movies, the plot is stressful to them, or somebody being really devastated or scared about something in the show is really bothersome to them and it's too intense. They'll often leave the room or ask to turn it off. It's really tough. And some other things as well, they tend to be anxious around new situations and people. They're pretty perfectionistic a lot of the times. They care so deeply. They just want to do things right and do things creatively and uniquely. And sometimes that pressure can really build up for them and they take it to heart if they don't do as well as they thought that they might.
Mm. I was absolutely resonating when you were saying the movies and entertainment. I have
Yes.
have a very distinct memory of the first time I ever cried at like a movie. It was Harry and the Hendersons, which is hilarious. That's what I cried at. I might have been 5 or 6. And I remember having such an intense empathic response to them mistreating Harry,
Yes.
the big giant character,
Yes.
that it was overwhelming. Like it felt like the feeling of empathy for him was never going to go away.
Oh,
And
yeah.
to your point also, it is true there's no empirically backed, as far as like a diagnosis, because this is not a diagnosis. This is a set of characteristics that is a trait.
Yes.
However, if you look on hsperson.com, which is Dr. Aaron's website, there is, for anyone listening, there is a test that you can do that is called Is Your Child Highly Sensitive? Have you seen
Wonderful.
this test before?
Haven't I didn't know that the test was there. That's amazing.
So, some of the questions that absolutely reflect what you were saying. If you, as a parent, are listening and your child, and this is some of the time, so this doesn't have to be all the time, startles easily, complains about scratchy clothing, seams, and socks, doesn't usually enjoy surprises,
Very
learns
cool.
better from a gentle correction than strong punishment, seems to read my mind, uses big words for his or her age, notices the slightest unusual odors, has a clever sense of humor, seems very intuitive, is hard to get to sleep after an exciting day. And the list goes on. There's quite a few questions.
Yes.
But if your child, so as an intuitive parent, if you can take the time to go do the test, if your child has, it says 13 character traits or more, or some that are very true, they may in fact be a highly sensitive child.
That's great to have some kind of assessment to make it more objective. And what I
Right.
appreciate about that list too is I heard the challenges on there, and obviously that's valid when we're trying to figure out what's happening here. But I also heard some strengths in there as well. And I think that's
Absolutely.
so important to include because these highly sensitive kiddos will like hit you with the most like deep questions ever. And they are often super insightful about themselves and about the world. And they have a lot of gifts to offer the world. So I'm glad that that list does a fair job of laying out both sides of the coin.
Such a good point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even with these kiddos having the gifts that they have, there can be some challenges. So I was curious on your end as someone who specializes in working with these children and has written. I love the workbook. I will just put this out there. I looked through it. I'm still waiting for my physical copy, folks. But I did look through the PDF of it. And actually, as a therapist, I'm excited to, when I get my copy, to make photocopies for some of my clients.
Yes.
And I did have one question before we launch into the topic on mistakes we might make with HSCs. But how would you advise if anyone wants to go out and get your workbook? Would you advise you hand the workbook to a child, or is this something you do with them?
Definitely something to do with them. We know that, children being handed a workbook and sent off to the room, a number of things could happen with that. There's distractions, but there also may be some difficulty taking away what the message of the activity is trying to give them. I highly recommend sitting down with them. And a positive aspect of that too is I think we as parents, when we're reading the language of a book that's explaining things in certain ways, that helps us have a better understanding of what our
Right.
child might be experiencing as well. And maybe it might even happen where a parent who hasn't realized they're a highly sensitive person themselves might be reading an intro about perfectionism or about emotional sensitivity and have like a little light bulb moment of going, you know what, that sounds like me too. And another piece of parents being helpful here is that the book is wide open for modifications to be made. There is a tip on every single activity. If your child doesn't like reading, you can read it to them, or you can try out, another version of this. If they absolutely loathe drawing and the exercise is asking them to do that, can they talk about their answer or maybe even play out their answer like theater or charades? So parents are really asked to walk this journey alongside their child and learn along with them.
I really did appreciate how each of your exercises had like a little tip about psychoed wise why this exercise was helpful.
Yes.
Something around this is common for HSCs. And we keep saying HSCs, highly sensitive child, as opposed to HSP. But
Yes.
I really loved that. And I wanted to ask you then, so your book is such a good example of what to do.
Uh-huh.
What do you think are some of the common mistakes that parents make with HSCs? And I ask this with a specific client of mine in mind. So, as we kind of alluded to, but we haven't said, the trait of being a highly sensitive person is very genetic. So, there's a very good chance that if you have a highly sensitive child, at least one or both of the parents are going to be highly sensitive as well. But sometimes there's also the case where the parent or the guardian is not highly sensitive, and they can kind of just have this look of what do I do with this highly sensitive child because they can't
Yes.
necessarily relate as well. So I think this is a twofold question. For HSP parents who can be overstimulated, what are mistakes they can make sure not to do? I'm asking that selfishly for myself. And for those who do not identify as HSP, but may have a hard time understanding what's going on with their child, what are some of the mistakes they might make that they can overcome?
Absolutely. So let's maybe take the latter question first. For
Okay.
parents who have a hard time understanding what highly sensitive children are going through and how they can try to maybe be on the same page together. I
Mhm.
would say while you might not be a highly sensitive person in general, I'm betting there are certain specific situations that would probably make you feel overstimulated. So my go-to example is I don't know that it's any adult's cup of tea to go to like an indoor birthday party where there are 20 screaming 6-year-olds running around and music blaring from the speakers and other parents yelling at their kids. Like most of us would find that to be an
A
uncomfortable
lot.
situation.
Right.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. And so just imagine how you would feel in that situation. I imagine you'd be getting tense and grumpy and maybe even anxious. And remember that that is how your child experiences overstimulation as well. It may be on a much smaller scale for them. It might look like being in a classroom where there's just a lot of like bustling around and nothing as quite intense, but the feeling is still similar. And whereas you, the adult, can perhaps walk out of a birthday party, get some fresh air, take a deep breath, and go back into it, your child can't just walk out of the classroom or walk out of family dinners when they're overstimulated. They're stuck in that situation that overwhelms them. And so I guess the tip there is to keep putting yourself in their shoes over and over again, because it's so easy for us to disregard their experience as she just needs to toughen up. She needs to get more resilient. But that's not fair. If you're in that situation where you're overwhelmed and anxious and somebody tells you that you're being too sensitive, that can feel really hurtful, or at the very least, make you feel really aggravated at them. It doesn't do good things for your relationship. Do you think that that answers?
Oh, yeah. And actually, I have a question about resilience because when you said that, I have two highly sensitive children,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and they're both very highly sensitive, but I can see it expressing in different ways. And
Yes.
I don't know if that's based on just personality or gender or predisposition, but with my daughter who just turned 9, I joke that she's having, and I don't joke to her, I joke to myself and to my husband that she's having a mid childhood crisis. Like when she turned 9 recently, she was destroyed by it. And I get it. It's you're approaching pre-adolescence, you're ending the
Uh-huh.
middle childhood years. It just feels like a lot. And there were moments and I think this probably leads well into our next question about how can an HSP parent deal with an HSP child.
Yes.
I found myself there was a day where she was really upset about this play space that she wasn't going to be able to go to anymore because the
Uh-huh.
age limit is 9.
Oh.
And I know, and I think the people who run the place, I'm not going to mention it, but it's in Cary. I think that but there's so many here, so I'm not really calling anyone out, but the people who run the place are absolutely not highly sensitive people in my opinion because we walk in and every time for the last 6 months we've gone, they announce it as if they're on a blowhorn. She's about 1 inch away from not being able to come in. She's almost 9. She can't come in. I really attribute this a little bit to her crisis. And
Yes.
so this one day leading up to her birthday, it was all day that she was lamenting about turning 9 and not being able to go to this play space. And I think 80% of the day I had it. I was helping her, I was listening, I was empathizing. And then finally
Yes.
towards the end of the day, I had it and I was like, I can't. So my curiosity in that moment was, to what point am I helping her as a highly sensitive child? And to what point am I steamrolling for her and not increasing her resilience? Do you see the I feel like a lot of parents probably feel this way.
Yes. Kind of caught between two sides here, trying to balance it all.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So know, first of all, that you are a person too. And if you're a highly sensitive person indeed, then that stress can really build up. And striving for 80% to me sounds fantastic. We cannot strive
Well,
to get it right
good.
100% of the time. That's too much to put on ourselves, even if you're not a highly sensitive person. So to your point, I think that in general, resilience is built actually through empathy and connection with others.
Mm.
So I wrote about in my newsletter recently that I went on vacation actually to North Carolina, to the
Oh,
Asheville
where?
region, to Asheville.
Oh,
We returned days before it hit. It
oh my
was
goodness.
unbelievable. Yes. But upon our return, we actually missed our flight home, and it was completely our fault. It was the dumbest thing ever. And I, being somebody who's a highly sensitive adult who wants to follow the plan and have things meet a certain schedule, was really upset by that. And I called my parents just to let them know that this was happening. And they were so kind about it and so empathetic. Oh, that's so hard to have a toddler with you and now be running behind on schedule. And it was their empathy that allowed me to go like, okay, I can take a deep breath. I can try to figure out what our next step is. Had they been like, Amanda, what's wrong with you? You're an adult. How could you have missed a flight? I think I would have stayed in that kind of anxious, panicked state for a while. So the way we build resilience with kids is by showing them understanding for the things that we're going through. And I think if you're a highly sensitive person yourself, you're in a unique position to genuinely be able to understand. I get that this play area is a lot for you. It gets really loud, or I get that you're feeling really sad because you might not be able to come here much longer. Those are the sorts of things that lay the groundwork for them to be able to start putting together some problem solving. But on the flip side, we don't want to solve the problem for them either. So, if we think of your example or perhaps a different situation, if let's say that kiddo has a hard time in their classroom sometimes because it gets to be noisy or there's a lot going on and they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing. After school, when hopefully their nervous system is a little bit more regulated, put a little bit of the critical thinking on their shoulders. Totally get why this is a tough situation for you. Situations like that are tough for me too. What ideas do you have for what we can do about this? So obviously, the ideas your child comes up with might not be appropriate for school, for home, just depending on what it is, but it plants a seed of starting to think through, how can I help myself here? What might work? Can I ask my teacher if I can put on headphones so that I can focus better? Just kind of helping them put those steps into action. That is the balance between kind of helping build up their resilience, but also still offering lots of connection and empathy along the way.
I love that too, because it seems like that would encourage self-empowerment, which
Yes,
is very important when you're navigating the world as a highly sensitive person.
absolutely. Yes. And the thing about a lot of highly sensitive kids too is they can be a little bit sensitive, shall we say, to other people telling them what to do. They kind of take that as an affront to their intelligence sometimes, for certain kids, not for all of them. And so the idea of being like, hey, I have trust and faith in you that you can come up with some good ideas here, really helps build their esteem. And I want to come back to, you asked earlier about like the biggest mistake a parent could make. And I spent a little bit of time kind of pondering that the last few days. And I think really the biggest mistake parents can make is in their mindset more than in a particular action or behavior. As we said before, you're going to get frustrated with your kid. You're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to say and do stuff that later you're like, oh, so that doesn't feel great.
Right.
But the mistake is in the mindset, as seeing your child as somebody who needs to toughen up for the real world, or feeling
Mhm.
that it's your job to make their sensitivity go away. We have to continue to see them as a whole person who,
Mhm.
yes, has challenges, but who also has awesome gifts to offer the world. And at the end of the day is truly trying their very best, even if it doesn't seem like it on the surface.
I absolutely love your answer to that question for so many reasons. And one of the reasons why I love doing this so much and talking to people with different ideas, I've always known resilience is going and asking for help and, being willing to put yourself out there and be vulnerable. But I think I always thought of it from the standpoint of what the person needs to go seek out. And I wasn't as much thinking about what the environment or what the caretakers or what the people can provide for them and how that's a feedback loop. And when you said our empathy can increase their resilience, it was amazing because it made me think about, okay, homework.
Uh-huh.
Having kids come home and do homework. So, this is the first year, I think it was a COVID thing. My daughter's school wasn't really doing homework for a couple of years. So, not only have they amped it back up and are doing it, but now it's also she's in the grade where there's more tests, there's more just everything. So now
Yes.
she has homework. So at first, the way that I deal with my sensitivities is I get stuff done really quickly, as fast as possible, as early as possible, so that I don't have to stress about them.
Mhm.
But I had to sit back and realize that me trying to get her to come home and do her homework right away
It's
was
too much.
stressing her out.
Yeah.
Yes, it was too much. And so there was, I think, the balance of what you're saying, where I had to empathize that her nervous system needed a little time to decompress after school. But also, I do need to encourage, like you said, problem solving, and that the taking resilience into, maybe there's another word we need for it. I don't know. Chutzpah? I don't know. Whatever the word would be, perseverance.
Yes.
Perseverance. And
Yes.
so now we've kind of met this middle ground where we take 30 minutes to play and relax and have a snack,
Hmm.
but trying to get her into a routine where she is going to do her homework 30 minutes after she comes home so that she can have perseverance, get through it, and then have the rest of the night to relax and ease into her nervous system.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing that is included in my workbook, actually, is there is an activity on helping families kind of plan out and schedule the day, because kids are
Oh,
so
okay.
different. There are kids that I see, like you described about yourself, where you're like, no, I want to come home and get it done and immediately, even if the parents are
That's
like, it's
always
cool
been
to
me.
take a second to chill. And that's fine. We can lean into whatever makes the most sense to them. And by making a
Mhm.
routine like that and being in charge of it, it does feel empowering for them.
Mhm. I also love what you were saying about the intelligence piece, because now I'm
Mhm.
thinking about my son, who I'm suspecting is highly intelligent
Mhm.
and a highly sensitive child. And it's not that he's oppositional, it's that he wants to do things on his own and he does not want
Yes.
you to
Yes.
guide or do for him.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think there's that. I think as a highly sensitive parent, you were saying earlier, mindset. I
Yes.
love that so much because if you look at the research and you look at articles about highly sensitive parents, one of the things that they tend to do is be harder on themselves about their parenting than they
Mhm.
actually should be.
Mhm.
And that a lot of highly sensitive parents, and those of you listening who are willing to be, more in touch with your sensitivity for your highly sensitive child, if you're even aware and you're even trying and you're even caring, you're probably doing a better job than you're giving yourself credit for.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. I don't know if you've read Robin Goebel's Raising Kids with Baffling Behaviors. it might be big baffling behaviors, trying to remember off
No,
the
but I
top of my
will.
head. There is a line in that has made such a huge impact on me. And she says, if you make a parenting mistake, you are experiencing a moment of suffering. And oh my gosh, how much like self-compassion that has opened up for myself. If I'm driven to the point where I say something that I don't want to say, or I yell or slam a door, I'm suffering too in that moment. My lid is flipped. I'm overwhelmed. I'm experiencing hurt. And so it's not that it makes an excuse for whatever behavior I've done. I still owe my kid an apology and a chat about it, but also to remember to show ourselves so much self-compassion in this, because particularly with parenting a highly sensitive child, it can be emotionally exhausting work sometimes. And we're people too who are deserving of every bit of empathy as we're trying to show our children.
I love that so much too. I hope that it actually gives parents the agency or the desire to engage in more self-care for your own sensitivity as well, because
Yes.
I have to say one of my favorite stories of my daughter, of me modeling behavior, is she was, I want to say 3 maybe, and she kept asking me for items. She was in the bathroom and she kept asking me for things like
Mm-hmm.
a book and a cup and all this. I was like, what is she doing? She must be doing one of her setups.
Uh-huh.
And I walk into the bathroom and she had set herself up in my like large garden tub with a towel over the top of her head, not the way you would imagine, a cup next to her, a couple books in the tub. And I said, honey, what are you doing? She goes, I'm being mommy.
Oh my gosh,
I
I
thought
love
that was so
that.
cute.
That's
I
so sweet.
know.
And what like a lesson you have shown her on taking
Hmm.
care of yourself and providing yourself comfort. That's wonderful.
I know. I loved it so much. And so I want to encourage parents, especially with the break coming up, the end of the year.
Yes.
I sometimes joke that the end of the year is like the weekend of the year.
Mhm.
Like, let's spend all our money, eat all the foods, get all the people together, do
Yes.
all the things in a compressed amount of time, but be pleasant and jolly. And what would you like to share with, or, really encourage parents going forward who are listening today to do for themselves and their highly
Mhm.
sensitive child during this time, the end of the year, the holidays, whichever holiday you celebrate or don't celebrate, but the time
Mhm.
together?
Absolutely. So, one thing that comes to mind if you are a highly sensitive person, adult, caring for an HSC, for a lot of us, alone time or quiet time feels
Mm.
really important. And so, making
Mhm.
sure to literally schedule that for yourself in the midst of all the festivities. And it might look
Mhm.
like maybe you're staying with family somewhere, and maybe you just step out of the house to go for a walk by yourself for
Mhm.
half an hour, or maybe you kind of work together with your spouse or your family member or whomever to say like, hey, let me have like the afternoon to myself at home while y'all go do something fun. And tomorrow I'll give you the same thing. I think alone time to just sort of like restore our sensitive nervous systems feels important. But even on just kind of, I suppose, a smaller level or maybe a bigger level, however you want to look at it. Let's say your kiddo has been struggling all day. All day, they've been coming to you for reassurance and for lots of support with, feeling like it's too much noise or too many people and things like that. If you start to notice in yourself, like, okay, I'm starting to need a little bit of a break from kiddo, especially if
Mhm.
they're more intensely melting down, crying, things
Mm.
like that. Know that it's always okay to give yourself a break, even in the moment. It's okay
Mhm.
to say like, "Hey, I'm starting to feel a bit stressed out too, sweetie. I'm just gonna step out of the room for a second and grab a drink of water. I'll be right back." It's all in the way that we word things. If you throw your hands up in
Mhm.
the air and walk out the door without saying a word to them, that feels like you're
Right.
abandoning them or neglecting them in
Mhm.
this tough moment. But if you're able to put words to that, it's not shaming. It's just being
Mhm.
honest that you're a person too and need a tiny break, and you'll be back to support them in a moment. It's absolutely not just okay, but important to do things like that.
Right. I love that too, because one of the things that we want to teach our HSCs is not to grow into an HSP who tends towards people pleasing or poor boundaries. And we
Yes.
really want to make sure, I think, that they protect their empathic energy. Hmm.
Absolutely. Boundaries are such a key word with highly sensitive kids. There's a whole chapter on it in my workbook because there's kind of two things that can happen. One pathway is that kids kind of, like you're saying, get into that people pleasing nature. And so they might let their boundaries go in an effort to maintain connection with others. But there's also another pathway where kids might hold on really, really rigidly to their boundaries and feel like they don't give second chances. They don't forgive people for mistakes because they're trying to protect themselves from hurt. And if somebody has made a mistake in their friendship once, they might do it again. So I better push them away. And those pathways can happen in the same child, by the way. You might have a kid who kind of lets their boundaries go for certain people only to like clench onto them for other people. So there are different activities that help them kind of look at these things pretty gently and talk about how we can protect ourselves and have limits, and we absolutely should. And let's remember that other people make mistakes too. And if they're sorry, if they're trying to make amends, then maybe we can listen to that.
Gosh, that just is so beautiful and makes me want to have an entire conversation with you about children and boundary setting and protecting themselves from what, many people call emotional vampires. So I might just have to have you come back
That would be great.
because you have so much more to share. I am curious though, if people want to continue, learning from you and staying connected to you, where can they look for you? And maybe just as a parting gift for the holidays, what would be your favorite, if you don't mind sharing, your favorite exercise, the one that
Favorite
you were just so
exercise.
excited to put into the book?
Oh, yeah. I would love to talk about that one. So, a theme throughout the book is on keeping up kids' self esteem while they're doing this. I
Hmm.
did not want any activity to come across as like shaking a finger at them, even if we're talking pretty directly about sometimes when we're overwhelmed, we do things that aren't very nice. Still
Hmm.
keeping up an atmosphere of you're human, you make mistakes, and we'll help you with this. But there's a specific activity called
Hmm.
My Sensitivity, or I'm sorry, not My Sensitivity. I think it was Sensitivity is a Superpower.
Oh,
And
and you should lift your
so,
book up. Let people see
oh,
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you have
This
it.
is
I
the
can't lift the
workbook.
the version I have on my computer. Oh,
No
it's such a
problem.
pretty cover too. I love it.
I love the blue so much. And I can actually just flip to Sensitivity as a Superpower real quick. It's actually at the end of the book. But
Hmm.
what kids get to do in this is make a comic strip about a person who is also a highly sensitive child. Because we know that highly
Oh.
sensitive kids have so many gifts. They have empathy, they're deep thinkers, they're typically really good planners. This is kind of it's a little bit of an outline. It guides them a lot along the way, but they're sort of crafting the story of a highly sensitive person who saves the day because, of course, they will. And I love that one because I think it just is so empowering for readers and makes them feel good about who they are. Because as we said before, this is not a diagnosis. This is not something that we
Mm-mm.
need to treat or make go away. There are real challenges that we can support, but it's a valid personality trait. It's a valid way of being.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I
I love
remembered
that.
your other question about how other people can find me.
Yeah. How can they find you and stay connected?
Yeah, I have an Instagram account where I post about highly sensitive kids or just child mental health in general, really. And it's at Amanda Robinson _LPC _RPT. And then my website and blog is amandarobinsonlpc.com. And on my website, you can sign up to receive my monthly newsletter as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming. And I'm hoping that some of our listeners have some new ideas or even some greater empathy for the way that they're feeling during this time of year and really any time of year. Whether you're listening to this around the holidays or later in the year, these things can be applied all year long. So, Amanda, thank you again so much for coming.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this, and it was great chatting with you about highly sensitive people.
Yes, you too. Okay, be well, everyone. Bye bye.